Praise God, praise God. What a blessing it is to be here at Convent Avenue Baptist Church. I give honor to Reverend Grant, your minister, and to all of those on the committee for African American history who invited me here. It's a pleasure, extra pleasure, because my good relative, Dorothy Clarkson, is here. And Dorothy, oh, my heart is just beating with love because I see you here. And thinking of J.B. Clarkson and what Convent Avenue Baptist Church represented to me as a child. J.B. Clarkson worked hard here. He was a deacon. And Dorothy Clarkson worked hard here as well. I grew up in Baptist Temple as a Sunday school teacher, teaching the Bible, and that good work that my parents did, that my mother, Mary Robinson, continued with, was such that the Spirit of God was always with me. And so that when there was trials and tribulations, what I have to say is that through it all, it was not necessarily the bio that you heard of Yale University and of all of the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the studies and the research that got me over, but it was what my mother and father and what my people represented, who praised the Lord, not just like a bump on the log, but they were active Baptists. You know, the Baptists have the emotional and the feelings that come out and reach out to you. And so on 115th Street where we lived, I was the oldest girl, and so I used to go shopping on Saturday mornings in a supermarket that was 116th Street in those days, and Lenox Avenue. And as I would come out, I would be wheeling the groceries all around to go to 115th Street. Malcolm X would be standing on that corner giving his lectures and talks. And so that I stood there because he was so magnanimous, and he was drawing you so much with the words. And so I stood there and listened to him. The men would be up close, but a little kid could go around the side with the groceries, stand there half an hour, and then go on down the block. And so I had a lot of the rich culture of Harlem. I remembered Malcolm X, and I remembered the Garveyites. In the building where I lived, it was the Father Divine and Daddy Grace in the same building. Around the corner was the Yoruba people. And so my life was set to maintain the God that I knew. So no matter how many of the many trips I took, I began with Dr. James Robinson of Operation Crossroads Africa. But my heart was always one-track mind for Jesus Christ. And so that no matter what happened, whether it was the cultures of the world coming together or whatnot, I was always back looking for the Jesus light and element, the Jesus love that continued to get me across. So that sometimes when I took a test, I remember taking the test to go to Yale University, and I heard the voice of God say, it didn't matter whatever I put down, although I think I put down the right answer. God meant for me to go there. And then when I remember not just being saved, but having that next step of salvation where you feel that you have the Holy Ghost and the fire of God, I remember saying, oh, this is so wonderful, a love of God that floods through your being, that melts anything that's hard and nasty and gets rid of your animosity quick and fast and keeps you on the right path. I said, Lord, I love you so much. And I said, I'm going to get rid of these objects. Those were museum objects. And I was in museum studies at Yale. And I said, I'm going to get rid of all of this. I'll even give up. I won't even go to Yale anymore. I love you so much. I'll just sit down and love you. And then I heard the voice of the Lord said, no, you will not. Your mission will be to separate the wheat from the chaff. So that many of those objects that our ancestors produced, many of them were not necessarily idols. An idol is anything you put in the place of God supreme. It could be your car. It could even be a picture of Martin Luther King where you always say, I used to march, I used to. What are you doing now? Are you worshiping represented idol. And so that I began to see even terrible looking objects that had nails all in them, and understanding that each nail represented a court case. And so that each nail was as if it was part of the long list of those who have died that was just mentioned as part of our rich ancestry, that they were court dealings and court cases, and that life is not always a bed of roses, but sometimes there are some vicious things that we have to overcome. So that same chapter 6 in Ephesians is one that talks about putting on the whole armor of
Amen.
God, so that we'll be full of strength. So that many of those objects that our ancestors produced, many of them were not necessarily idols. And
Welcome to the Gilchrist Experience. That you see is Queen.
Queen Mother.
Queen Mother. Rosalind Jeffries. And that's my home church. I started going to that church in 1942 when they first came up the hill.
Wow.
My grandmother was a pastor, Reverend Saunders. He was a pastor in Camden, New Jersey. So when he came to convent in 42, of course I was on my mama's knee. I was a year old. And I've been in convent ever since. Of course I wandered off for 40 years and came back. But
in Midian.
but
It wandered in the wilderness.
this foundation that she speaks about is Harlem. This is a Harlem girl, Harlem queen, and this woman, you share what, 54 years of marriage, Dr. J?
Yes.
54 years of
and
marriage.
she mentioned James Robinson.
Right.
But James Robinson is really Reverend James H. Robinson.
Okay.
And he had a mission to link us to Africa.
Okay.
And who was the vehicle that helped him do it? The later president of Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah. He went to Lincoln University with Kwame Nkrumah. And when Nkrumah struggled with his people and they became independent in 57, he wanted African Americans, African Caribbeans to link up with Ghana. So he made the call. And in 1957, when they were celebrating independence, the call was realized. Who was with Kwame Nkrumah at that time? W.E.B. Du Bois.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Who was with him? Two Johnsons. Mordecai Johnson, the president of Howard University, and John Johnson, the president of Ebony and Johnson Publications. Ralph Bunche was there. In other words, he brought a significant group of us to have a presence at the independence of Ghana. Now, Reverend Robinson at that time said that I'm going to create an organization to organically link to Ghana, and that organization was Operation Crossroads. Rosalind was in his church, the Church of the Master. They had, with Minnesink, they had Rabbit Hollow. They would take the kids up in the summer up to the Catskills, et cetera. So her and Reverend Robinson were very close. And then Spirit brought me into connection with Reverend Robinson in 1960. Now, Rosalind had gone with him in the summer of 60 to Africa. She went to Nigeria. And when she was mentioning she was brought home art and whatnot to 115th Street, her mother was shocked and said, "What is this? Get this stuff out of here." And so she has, since her African experience in 1960, been reconciling the creativity and spirituality of African art, modern style, with the deep traditions of our people that with her now go back past Mali and Ghana and those, and goes into Ethiopia and into Kemet, and then swings back around the Congo. When she was talking about the nails in the statue, that Ikisi statue sits on our dining room table.
Ah,
And so
Okay.
she's reflecting, she's living this spirituality that she has and reconciling the deep African tradition. So Reverend Robinson comes to Lafayette College to speak because he was raising money for his program. And I went out there for a football week, and I went to Lafayette College. And so I decided to go down and see the chaplain because they had a student-run church. I was an elder in the church. And when I walked into this white man, knocked on the door of the manse, the red door, and it opened. There were two men sitting in front of me. One was a black man, Reverend James H. Robinson, and Chaplain Curry. And Chaplain Curry said, "That's the man for your program." Just like that. And because he knew he had been with me for 4 years, he knew my great interest in things. And so Reverend Robinson spoke. I carried his bag across the campus. He spoke to 1,500 of these all-white young men on the challenge of Africa. And he was so powerful, I knew there was no way in hell that message wasn't for nobody but myself. And so from that point, I was transfixed and transformed in bonding with him. And so I said, I'm going to go on his program. But I was in law school. I was at NYU Law School. So I had to finish that year of law school, and then I went with his program in 61. Roslyn went in 60, I went in 61. And then when I came back, I was lecturing about the program, and that's when I met Roslyn Jeffries. And then that was 61. We started dating around Harlem and up near Columbia, 62, 63. And then we got married in 64 at the Church of the Master, right a few blocks from her house, 115th Street, and right down from Columbia. And so we had a fantastic, fabulous wedding in Harlem with several hundred people. And then we took them up to the Heights to Columbia to show Columbia what black folks look like. So we had the biggest integrated thing at Columbia and Hamilton Hall. That was our reception.
Oh,
And then that was 64. Malcolm and others were making their move in West Africa, North
Columbia
Africa.
was quite radical in 64, wasn't it?
It got radical
getting
in
there.
those years coming up, 60, while I was trying to
67.
complete my
Yeah.
PhD, 67, 68. But the vision of Africa and the spirituality around that, not just an academic exercise. Africa is spirit. Africa is the Garden of Eden.
Ashe, ashe.
And it's out of Africa that the great spiritual events have taken place. And so you don't have a Bible unless you have it wrapped around the African Garden of Eden. But other people have taken the narrative that is ours and transposed their own consciousness on our narrative. But in these 60s, modern 60s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, there's an explosion of information now. We know that we are the chosen. And so people say, well, wait a minute. We say, well, it's not just in the ancient texts, it's in the science and the laws of
DNA.
nature. In other words, the oldest humankind
Right,
is our
right.
people.
Absolutely.
They have one, and so whatever narrative you have transposed from the Greco-Roman tradition to the Abrahamic tradition onto the Christian tradition and the Muslim tradition, the foundation is African.
But
And
I
that's
see
what we
you
tapped
as a
into.
male with a queen that
Queen
comes out of the
mother.
Baptist church, and which I didn't realize that until, well, I'd seen this years ago. But to think of her foundation, the way she expressed herself, there's nothing more dynamic. I can see why you are the man that you are.
But let's, and I'll agree.
And
you know what I mean?
If you didn't have a partner
Right.
who could
Okay.
handle my life,
54 years worth.
well, it's even
But you
more-
always
it's-
had that Christian right there next to
No,
you.
but it's an African Christian. Let's not
Oh,
put
wait a minute.
let's
Wait,
not
she's on
put-
Harlem
Let's
now.
not put a blonde, blue-eyed Jesus on it.
No.
Hey,
You gotta
Jesus
put
is
that-
not.
you-
Jesus
that's
is black.
right.
Okay,
Right.
he's
That's
an
right.
Ethiopian.
Put-
He looks like
okay,
me.
yes. So
All right.
then
Look
we
like
can
me.
talk Jesus, but don't be
Like
giving
him.
me.
Look at us.
you know. But the fantastic thing is, she's talking
Why
about
do you?
the
Why do you
trans-
make Jesus blue-eyed? Why do you go for that? Why do you even promote that?
No, I'm
You know
saying
Jesus isn't blue-eyed.
He's not
No,
promoting
Dr.
that.
J has
I
never.
am saying he's messing with me. I'm saying wherever we go, even the blackest of people on the African continent want a blonde, blue-eyed Jesus because their consciousness has been so messed over
Right.
that they don't. When we say Jesus coming out of the experience he had in what we call Kemet, the Nile Valley, he had to be of African background. Africans on the continent, so we want a white Jesus. In fact, they have some myths on the continent that if you see going to church, if you walk into church or driving to church and you happen to see a white man along the road or your path crosses him, you can go back home because you saw Jesus. Now that's the type of mythology and craziness that's in the mind of our people.
It just
So
reminds me of the fact that people are trying to say that Christianity is a white man's religion. That's why.
Well, that myth,
See, that's a lie.
you know,
And,
I have
you know,
I have discoursed with some Muslim brothers years ago. I said,
Yeah.
you don't understand our history. All right? Jesus was not white.
right,
He wasn't a Jew.
right.
Right? I said, and when you look at,
He was Hebrew.
he was an Israelite.
Okay.
And that's a distinct grouping of people. Semitic people, if you get a dictionary 50 years old or older, and you look up the word Semite, you will see Edomic people of brown skin.
Okay.
They're not white, and they don't come from Europe. Abram, who is the father of the Israelites, came from Ur of the Chaldees, according to the scripture.
Mesopotamia,
Ur of the Chaldees is present-day Iraq.
right? Mesopotamia, ancient Mesopotamia.
So you can't even talk. We need to study history. If you don't want to believe and study scripture, study history. History will open your eyes to the fact that the scripture, the text there, is correct. When you go into Europe, when I was in Italy, there were churches that I went into in Italy. They have the Black Madonna. There's no blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus
Okay.
in the churches in northern Italy where I was. So the Anglo-Saxon took the story. King James put a twist on it because he knew of Jews in Europe who had proliferated across Europe between the 9th century and the 17th century. They had been ministered to by rabbis coming out of Palestine, and those were black people. They then took on the term Jew, and by the time King James comes around 800 years later and he's translating the scriptures into English for the common man, the term Jew is interjected there. But Abraham wasn't a Jew. Jesus wasn't a Jew. They were
Hebrew.
Israelites. They were Semitic people, and Semites are not European. Semites are not white. And we need to study. Paul said, study to show yourself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. And all truth. 1 and 1 is 2. Is it true? I'm a black man. Is that true? This is a table. Is it all truths?
And the big truth is I hope you have security in your job with all of this truth you're talking about.
I never work. Security, it comes from God. That's the only place you can get
Amen.
security.
But even to camp in on that, it is important to say, and I want to say I'm honored to be at this table today with Dr. Leonard Jeffries, who I was able to be of service to for so long. But most importantly, I want to just use one of his important phrases that he did not mention. He who controls the images controls the mind.
Right.
The
Okay.
mind control that we're talking about of ancient Mesopotamia and the Hebrew word becoming the word Jew is significant because of the conference of Chalcedon. Let's be perfectly clear. In the dark ages of Europe, they were burning books, the Dead Sea Scrolls, all of these ancient testimonies to our awesomeness and our presence in cultures beyond. And this was a necessary requirement in order to control the minds. When Dr. J just said that today in the motherland, and I call it the motherland because the more and more it becomes Africa, the more and more it becomes other than what it was intended, other than what it was. And as people are becoming more African, it's almost becoming like a Jew or like a a Muslim or any other persons, because they're giving away the value and their natural healing component, their natural conversation with God. If we are the first humans on earth and we've been having a conversation with God 3 million years, when do people give us gods that we accept? The beautiful thing about Christianity, Islam, Buddhism is the humanness and the spiritualness that comes within you once you're whole. This
Right.
is what Queen Mother Rosalind Jeffries is interjecting as she went to study the important artifacts of our ancient history,
Right.
so that she could compose the reality of this doesn't have to be separated from us. It's our original response to God is. And God is so perfect because we were doing ritual to sustain ourselves from any iniquity or be overtaken by the Hexos and whoever else came upon the mother with an evil intent. Because these things that we did not value meant something. You know, in today's society, people can still take spirit of a grandfather and encase it in their own homes in something called a shrine. Now, if you're talking to people about a shrine, they'll say, oh yeah, they have shrines in the Catholic Church because I go and I light my candle and I say my prayers, and that's my shrine to Mary, Mother of God.
Right.
Well, your shrine to Mary, Mother of God, should also be in your home to the very mother who gave birth to you. And the shrining concept is not a Catholic concept or a concept that Catholicism owns. Again, everyone took from the mother the knowledge, the wisdom, the guidance of spirituality, then threw it into a bowl of garbage, and then after the garbage was completed, returned it to us so that we could pick through the garbage and decide that this garbage is our new story. But
So
again,
you're saying like you could take the picture of a dead ancestor, or and make it a shrine.
it's deeper. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
My mother transitioned from this world in 2016.
Okay.
And one of the most perfect things that she did is she gave me 1 year to get ready. And she said,
Really?
I'm born September the 16th. I knew she was going. Because if I could come out of her as an only girl in September the 16th, I knew that I was with her when she said, I'm tired, I'm 81, and I told you I would give you until I was 9. Well, 8 plus 1 is 9. So she left me guidance, but immediately upon her departure, when I returned to New York City, she was living in South Carolina at the time, I completed the shrine so that in my home, on one of my altars, is her shrine so that we can communicate, because she is in the world of the ancestor angel. I'm writing the book that explains the dimension between an ancestor and an angel. There are dimensions in afterlife, right?
Okay.
So our spirituality concurs that you make transitions. You make transitions. The ancient pharaohs of Kemet were buried into tombs going through transitions.
Okay.
The Dead Sea Scrolls explain the many levels of the spiritual divide.
So the spirit never
Yeah,
died.
but this is ancient, but it is also now. Our
So-
parents leave, but they don't really leave us.
So this is the human experience of the spirit.
The human experience of the soul,
Soul.
elevating to
Okay.
spirit is a process.
Okay.
Because when you're meeting evil and you're meeting contemptuous individuals, that's not developed to spirit. People will say, oh, so-and-so is a good spirit. Well, he could be a good soul. A spirit is a whole new bag of peas. That is an elevation. Everything in life is a process of elevation spiritually. And what Mother Queen Dr. Rosalind is explaining is that inside of her wisdom now and her infinite PhD studies, she has been able to go forward and see the power of the original truths that the motherland has allowed to come through as examples. We needed guidance to reawaken. If there was no visiting the motherland and digging fossils up and digging up our artifacts, we would be forever enslaved by someone who considered themselves our superior when we were building pyramids without
Right.
their existence.
And so that's the great struggle now. And that's what we've been involved in, and we need to see it as a great struggle. There is a book by George G.M. James called Stolen Legacy.
Yes.
Yes, a
And that's
powerful book.
1954
Yeah, we have
when
to read
Spirit
that.
allowed him to bring forth this masterful work. And since that time, there's been an explosion of information, and our role is to try to capture as much of it as we can, package it so that we can put it in our minds and in our hearts and move away from this enormous system of domination, destruction, and death, which is the system of white supremacy, which took us out
Ashe.
of the human flow and put themselves in our place. But the Creator has a way of speaking this enormous truth. And
Okay.
so, fortunately, my wife and I have been in Africa, and Africa has been with us for so long that most recently they had the Organization of African Unity. It was started in 1963. That's when we were in Africa. I was in Guinea in 1963 when it was started. In 1964, it was expanding itself, and that's when El Haj Malik El Shabazz, Malcolm X, met the spirit of unity that was created in 63. And he said, well, we need this in African American, African Caribbean context, the New World African context. So he said, we need to create the Organization of African American Unity, and then Muslim Incorporated, so that you can have that spiritual component. But we have claimed and have been given our history, and you can enshrine it in whatever form you think. But the most important shrine is in your heart and
Right.
in your mind. And so that's where the grandfather that I never knew, that was murdered, that was born, and August the 10th, August the 17th. Marcus Garvey was born August the 10th, but he was born before Marcus Garvey in 1868. I never knew of him, but he's in me. And during these great periods of my life, he has come to me. And the Great Spirit has said, go to your grandfather. I said, what grandfather? I said, you're in Georgia now with the one who did Malcolm X's autobiography. Now he's working on Roots, and so I'm there in '76 with Alex.
Alex
And the white folks sit me down at the table. Margolis, who was the producer, and Green, who was brought in from England to handle the African component. And I was there for 2 weeks. Alex had asked me to come to be his consultant, so I went down. So I'm changing different parts to be true to the history that I know. And these white fellows, good white fellows now, sit me down at the luncheon table and say, Dr. Jeffries, we're glad you're here, but we have to let you know that we bought the rights to the book Roots. We're under no obligation to deal with the truth of the book, and we certainly don't have to deal with the truth
And
of
what
your
year?
history. This is
We're
a
talking about the
reality.
70s?
This is 76 in Brunswick, Georgia, Savannah, Georgia, where
Whoa.
they filmed Roots. Now, I had been with Alex, and I met him in San Jose in
You actually had to
1960.
go through that.
I met him in 1969, in the same month that I met Dick Gregory, Ron Dellums, and a whole host of others in San Jose when I set up the African Studies program in California. So Alex came to me 70 and 71. He needed help. And so I helped him get a $500,000 grant from Carnegie Corporation to do Roots. So I'm with him for 7 years, from 69 to 76. White folks said, we bought your history.
Who
I
did
was
they
not.
pay?
I
Who
was
did they
not.
pay?
Huh?
Who do they pay for the rights?
Whatever other part of their mechanism that Alex did not control Roots. He produced it, but he signed a contract to David Wolper and his heirs forever, ever, and their heirs for either $50,000 or $100,000. Something that made $100 million was sold. And when his secretary called me and she said, Len, I said, oh, what's wrong, Pat? She said, I'm looking at this contract and I'm reading. So that was the contract he signed. All of the greatness that we saw coming out of that
Oh my God.
recycles itself into the system of white supremacy. And that's why I came up with this concept of economics. We got to control our economics. Politics, we have to have a political component to manage the economics. And culture tells you what type of economics to devise and who to do your politics with. It is that spiritual triangle which will allow us to link up, put the bullshit aside, and move away from a paralysis of analysis and get into a systems analysis. It is the system that's bringing forth the greatness of Africans. There's no one of us that are doing it. It is the system of universal truth that's manifesting itself. So what did I do? I stayed with Alex for 2 weeks. I'm loyal, and I wasn't going to leave no matter what. But then they had a scene in the Brunswick, Georgia warehouse where they had a cutaway of a slave ship, and they had the foredecks of the slave ship. And I'm with the other brothers and sisters that were part, and we're watching this. And on the lower level is Kunta Kinte. On the upper level is his trainer, who happened to have been O.J. Simpleton. That was a mistake in the casting, but O.J. was the... O.J. is calling down to Kunta Kinte, moaning and moaning. Kunta Kinte, you have to be strong. You have to, because we have to fight the white man and return to Mother Africa. I'm over at the side with these other men in tears, and all of us are in tears in this great scene, like we're swaying in the slave ship. And Green runs out, stop. And we said, what does this man want to stop this scene for? And he says, we do not want to have in this scene return to Mother Africa.
Oh, wow.
And that did it for me. At that point, I said, I have to break from this, and I have to find another way. And I didn't know where I was going to go. No PhD from Columbia, master's and PhD from Columbia, no year in law school, no 2 years studying in Switzerland, no honors work at Lafayette College could put me back together. I was devastated, thrown off my psychic center. And then Spirit said, go to your grandfather's grave. And I said to Spirit, what am I going to go where? I don't know nothing about my father's father in Georgia. And so I was smart enough to call up to Aunt Bessie, just as Alex went to his aunties, and they gave him his story. I said, Aunt Bessie, tell us about the family. Where are we from? She said, we're from Ohio. I said, Aunt Bessie, nobody's from Ohio. We migrated out of Georgia to Ohio. Where in Georgia is your father and my grandfather? And she got my drift, and she said, your grandfather and my father is buried in Midway Church Cemetery, Jasper County, Kelly, Georgia. Somebody I had not known. No one had ever talked about him. I don't think my father ever knew his father because he was murdered by the Klan when my father was 3 in 1917. My father was born in 1914. However, with that information of your grandfather in Kelly, Georgia, Spirit said, go to meet him. And so I left Alex. I never told him why. I even, left him a note that it was an important reason, but I wasn't going to tell him I had been devastated. No great white history education, no consciousness of being black could restore me. I had to meet this Spirit. And so I went, I rented a car. I flew out of Savannah with Lauren Green, going to Atlanta. Lauren Green was a part of the Roots thing, and he was talking, isn't Roots great? Bonanza. It's everybody's history. And he's sipping mint juleps. I wanted to throw him out to the plane. I was saying it's everybody's history, but it's a special history for us. Got to Atlanta, and my mother would never let us go to rural Georgia. She would let us go to rural Georgia. Every summer we went, Virginia, because she could take care of us there. So here I am for the first time, renting a car and going into rural Georgia, heading down Route 20, I-20, going to Augusta, and then turning off at 142, heading toward Monticello. And eventually, I got to Kelly, Georgia, a cluster of homes, a general store, and then I had to get to the church and the cemetery. And I did. Rented car, it's getting dark. I've never been in rural Georgia before. I should be afraid to death. I wasn't afraid of nothing except snakes. So I got me a stick to deal with the snakes. That's a city boy stupidity. They told me that later, they said, you should be worried about the ticks. A stick ain't gonna do nothing for a snake. And so I found the church that they had built. and it was open. I went in and did whatever spiritual thing I needed to do. And then I had to get the strength to go out, turn the lights of the car on, and go into the cemetery. And I did. And when I got into the cemetery, the tallest tombstone in the cemetery was my grandfather's tombstone. It was a tekken, a symbol of rebirth and resurrection. On it was his vital statistic. Jesse Jeffries, born August the 17th, 1868, died July the 16th, 1917. I didn't realize that death was at the hands of the Klan. However, the important thing was, here I am standing before a symbol of resurrection and rebirth, and on it were the twin pillars of masonry.
Oh, right.
Here is someone born with 1 foot out of slavery. His brother James was born in 1865 in slavery. And my grandmother was born in 1870. Here they are in the middle of the chaos of the first Klan and white folks trying to put us back into slavery. They still were able to get their land, build their churches, build their school. The schoolhouse on a hill, not far from his gravesite, was built by our family. The Bronners, the Maddocks, the Jeffries built the schoolhouse. We know which uncle did the wood frames, which did the masonry. And from that schoolhouse came generations of our people that went on to boarding school at Payne College, and then on to Payne College, and then on to the colleges in Atlanta. One of the most fantastic stories in my history is in my own family. It has never been properly told, never been properly written about. That's the spirit that they brought up out of Georgia, out of Virginia, out of South Carolina, planted it in Harlem communities, planted in North New Jersey communities, planted in Cleveland, planted in Akron, planted in Los Angeles.
This is a mini-series that you're talking here.
I want to go back to Georgia rather than go back to Africa. You're always trying to get me to go back to Africa. Let's go back to Georgia.
We don't have to go back to Africa. Africa is in us.
Right.
Okay.
But here's the thing that's so beautiful about Dr. J's homing device. Do you understand the internal spirit is so powerful within that here he had been on the set of Roots, broken, damaged, confused, and even worried about the future of the next generation. As a leader in the community and as an educator, we know the next generation is all that we work for. If they work and they grow, we live. But the homing device of spirit, ancestral spirit, had a homing device that demanded that he find in the middle of the wilderness. If you've never been to Georgia or South Carolina or any parts of Kentucky, you can't just get in cars and find anything. But to get in a car without a GPS, we're talking non-GPS era, right? Get in a car, take a trip, turn a corner, turn another corner, and be taken to the very gravesite of that elder who led your family out of the condition of exploitation of our people. That is what we're talking about. That is endemic to the spirit of the child born first on the human experience. And we have to be comfortable with that. I'm very comfortable now teaching first, second, and third. There are 3 great races. I hope everybody knows how to run. But do not take away my birthright. The homing device that Dr. J experienced in Georgia took him to his grandfather because it was necessary for him to restore his umbilical cord.
To be ready to take on the greatest struggle after that. This is 76 now. After 76, I come up to New York, and we put in place the most significant Black Studies program on the planet. Bringing all this African American, African Caribbean. Professor Scobie was there. People from the continent was there. And that was in place when the biggest attack against our history came. And they threw everything at us, and we responded with spirit as well as any other forces we could put together.
All right. So now we owe it to everybody in the audience to teach them how to get to their spirit, how to come home.
You know, it's such an important process, and I've learned from my queen mothers who have guided me, including my birth mother, Francis Hunter Pearson, that was in fact a living human spirit, elevated, and all her trials and tribulations with my father. The human spirit is within,
Okay.
and the indigenous
God that lies
human
within.
spirit of humanity is within.
Okay.
But the process of becoming, much like what Moshel is writing about,
Right.
the book on becoming. Why becoming? Because you are every single day of your life in the process of an evolution.
Right.
You are on a journey
Right.
to becoming your true self,
Right.
the divine, absolute image of the creator force of the
Right.
universe.
Amen.
And we talked about the universe
Amen.
before, but the universe. So if people are looking for the process does begin with intellect. You have to educate yourself above the frequency of your oppressor. If you get to the third grade and think you know
I like
everything,
that.
Right.
then you are lost. If you get to the 8th grade and think you know everything, you are lost. If you get your PhD and think you know everything, you are lost. You are there's an evolutionary period.
In fact, the PhD represents the highest level of miseducation that one can receive. And if you don't understand that, you've mastered miseducation, and now you go for the PhD, the highest level. Now that's what I call my $1 million white boy education, but I am what I am because of the multi-billion-dollar African education that comes from this side of the ledger, not just with this Jeffries that I met in the cemetery, but my mother from Virginia. She comes up from a spiritual village in Virginia before they migrated up to Washington and up to Newark, New Jersey. She meets this Leonard Jeffries, they marry. Her firstborn is little Lenny, myself, born January the 19th, 1937. That is the birth date of my mother's father.
Oh, wow.
I was born on Papa's birthday.
Wow.
Here is this black
Ashe.
child coming in
Ashe
at this
again.
at Papa's birthday. Now Papa was born in 1888, so you got Marcus Garvey, 87, surrounded by the Jeffries and this one. Now, Papa comes up from the South, in the village in the South that they did their spiritual thing. He comes up a Booker T. Washingtonite. They are farmers. And Booker T was a special light unto the farmers because
Yes,
he
he
said you
was.
got to have scientific farming. You got to have, and he brought
That's
George
right.
Washington Carver
Carver with
to
him, that's
speak
right.
to the plants,
That's right.
bringing not only his
talk to the
scientific understanding, he
plants.
spoke to the plants, and he is there with Booker T. And Booker T is saying, don't follow the master. Control your land. Raise your cattle, and then that cattle can be used to nourish you, but you can use the hides to do shoes. Make your own shoes. Make your own bricks. Design your own buildings. That was self-government, self-development. That's Booker T. And so Booker T comes out of my grandfather's spirit, and then you have somebody called W.E.B. W.E.B. Du Bois happened to fit into the picture because my mother's people come from the Powhatan Indians, and so she had a great aunt, Pocahontas, who became the secretary of W.E.B. Du Bois
Amen.
and helped him in his research on Farmville, Virginia, when he was studying the migration out of Farmville in 1897 into Philadelphia, which eventually produced the Philadelphia Negro Research. So Pocahontas, my mother's great aunt, was with Du Bois. So part of my pablum is Booker T, W.E.B., and Marcus Garvey. They were Garveyites coming up from the South.
You know,
So how could, if you have that type of package in you on both sides, how could you not be what you are?
Well,
You
let
got to
me-
go even beyond what you even think you have arrived at.
Yeah, the better half. Let's hear from Rosalind again.
Okay. Yes. Yes. Because she comes
I want everybody to see
a
what's
package out of South
incorporated in
Carolina.
you
Yes.
for the last 54 years.
And what she
all
has
right?
helped. Yes.
Somebody that's still alive and with you now.
That's
the
right.
wind beneath your wings.
Okay,
All right?
that's Regent Adelaide Sanford.
Yes, indeed. My
Beloved.
spiritual
Yeah,
teacher.
John, play that. Are you ready for that, Bev? You ready for that? Play the second half of Rosalind.
January 19th,
Right next to it.
1889,
Yeah, that's the one.
my grandmother. don't want to know anything about Mother Africa. You know, that's like in your face.
He liked so much because it became the book that is indeed the inclusion, giving the data that we need. And it's written in such a way that it talks about
Every high school I've been in.
and the resistant movement in Africa. It talks about the resistant movement in the Caribbean and Cuba and Puerto Rico and various places.
See, this
but also in
1-2
South
punch
America,
with you
the
and her?
resistance down there. And then it goes into the resistance
To
of
Brazil.
Harriet Tubman, the Sojourner Truth, Denmark Vesey, and David Walker, and the various people that are here in the Americas. And so thus the people in South America love this book, but because it included their Zumbi, who is there, Nat Turner, and it included Quilombo, their community of runaways who became a vital force of unity for the building of Brazil. But what was interesting is that we need to also take that long list of the patriarchs of African
Oh, there's a caller.
that we know so well and not just recite them for February over and over, but we must do this
Every day.
year after year to see them in light of the new changes, the transformation, because we are an organic world and we are moving and transforming. And so I said to the people down in Brazil, I said, be reminded that every time you look at the cityscape of these large cities, Sao Paulo, look like it's bigger than the black communities of New York City. Look at your Brasilia, their capital. Look at the skyline all lit up. Look at Rio all lit up at night.
That's Africa, man.
And say to yourself, thank God for an African American, because it's African American.
The cities that were in Africa before the white.
That made possible for all of these cities in Brazil to be lit. And not only that, but cities like London and Paris and Hong Kong, Tokyo, you name them all around the world.
And she's going to get on Benjamin.
She's going to get on Benjamin people that we
Banneker. She's going to, yeah. Oh, she's going to talk about the light bulb and how without the filament.
Edison could not have done it.
Right, Edison. That's what she's going to get.
And he wanted Latimer to come and work for him. Latimer said, excuse me?
So that Europe could grow and develop. Europe could not exist without our ancestors, our blood, sweat, and tears. The part of the reasons of the Civil War was because 60% of the cotton that came from us that provided the capital. You can't do anything, no business. You know, business people, you know you can't have a business without capital. Where did the capital come from to build America? It came from us. Free labor, no pay, no pay. Many over and over. We built this country. And so that 60% of the cotton that we had went to Europe and not to the north here, to the northern part of America. The North got jealous. It's all in here. The North got jealous, and that was the reason the war started to come on. It was economics in the same way that economics is at the basis of the drug traffic. We did not fly the planes or build the planes to bring in the drugs. We did not build any of the boats for the traffic. Yes, some of our people sold to each other out like the drugs dealers sell to their own family members.
Right?
But it's a huge network in operation, and thus, you know, that the forts, great forts, all Ghana, over 40 of those dungeons.
Come back.
I was in the dungeon, cool.
Okay. Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, my baby doesn't have the support she normally has in the back, so.
I was surprised. Yes,
you
I
know,
usually see people
usually
in
we
there
have
with
help.
her.
But today is, she's all by herself today.
Doing a good job, Bev.
He's doing a great
Keep
job.
it up,
Yes.
all right?
But we cannot leave
but-
this session without. When Rosalind's holding up that book she's talking about, we took that book to Brazil. The vice president of Brazil, who is he's handling the parliament, he was so anxious to get that book that he was running between us in his office and controlling the parliament. The fellow who saw Quilombo in the book, he played Zumbi in the great film on Quilombo. I mean, these are not, you couldn't have planned
It's so
these
personalized.
things. Brazil knew that this book was a model they needed to have, changing the history and putting Brazilian history. And so that book is so powerful that it's no longer in print.
Yeah. But
And
several
so-
schools had it
Yes,
before
a
it went
lot.
out of
We
print.
distributed
It got
as
into
best
the
we
Harlem
could.
schools.
But again, we take the culture and the knowledge where we go. If we go to Brazil, we take it. If we go to Africa, we take it. And one great moment that we need to put in this record is that Ethiopia is a special spiritual center of this enormous spirit that we're talking about. You're talking about the highlands, but also you have the river valley, et cetera. Right. All of that, Sudan, Nubia, all of that is spiritually centered in terms of the human family. So the AU was formed in
And Jesus was
1963.
Ethiopian, right?
We'll put, if you're talking about the Garden of Eden, we'll put him right there.
Nubian.
We'll put him right there. Now, here is thousands of leaders coming to Ethiopia to celebrate the inauguration of this new center that the Chinese helped to finance. The new center for the OAU, all of the 50+ African nations. So you're talking about thousands of leaders there. The great event was not them meeting and discussing what they have done. The great event was that Dankanesh, sometimes miscalled Lucy,
Okay.
who was found in the hills of Ethiopia
Amen.
3,800,000 years
Exactly.
ago.
Right.
And her bones represent this continuity of the human spirit coming out of the African experience, which is real. She had made a 4-year tour of the world to let them know that this African truth is omnipresent. And when you walked into this new magnificent center, everybody who went in through those security doors had to turn to the left. And there was the return to Africa, Dankanesh, that we all had to pay homage to. You can't understand these events that are happening in our time, which make clear who we are. We don't have to get caught up into the miseducation that we think that we're going to try to be the president of the United States, or my nephew Hakeem is going to try to do
sixth
this and
one.
that. He's got an even greater vision for what he should do. People say, oh, well, he's competing with the other elder.
No.
That's not a competition, that's family business. And if in the African, they would have met separately and said, you take this time, you take
Right,
this. Hakeem is in his 40s, 47 or something. Barbara Lee is in her 70s. So there's going to be a transition.
Has to be.
And that's why we have to work. We need the African
And he should be
understanding.
president.
Pass
you
it
know,
on.
That's
You
it.
know?
The name Dankanesh, and we need to understand it. We need to know who we are, not the round peg square hole. Everybody, when you say they found the woman Lucy, everybody knows.
Yeah,
But they're
you
calling
say
her
that.
Lucy,
That's right.
and that's not her name.
Right.
We need to take that Eurocentric mind set that we have and put it to the side. When you speak to the Chinese, they're not talking to you about the United States. They're talking to you about China.
Right.
All of us need to grab the essence of who we are. Because if we don't, we will remain in a state of confusion and conflict. Don Kanesh, we need to understand, memorize that name.
Right.
Forget about Lucy. They know Lucy's in
right,
Africa.
right.
Nobody ever came out of Africa with the name Lucy unless it's of a late day period.
Right.
They will research. They will go through our stuff and define it. They'll go through our stuff and name it. You can't allow other people to identify you, because if they can identify you, you have no identity.
Right.
Just as you said, they said they don't want to hear nothing about Mother Africa
Mother
in the
Africa.
movie, and they
Wow.
don't care about
Return to
African
Mother
truth.
Africa. You're right.
And that was smack dab in the face. In the
Update
face.
us to the 21st century, and we're here on the Gilchrist Experience.
So
And
this is kicking
a
off
spiritual
Well,
journey.
Well,
And,
our brother
and
Gilchrist
it's great
does not.
to have you from the beginning of the program.
Okay, but also
From the beginning.
it's great to
Doc
have.
was
it's
here on
it's great to
time.
have you know that they'll be honoring me tomorrow in Newark, New Jersey.
Okay.
Ras
Oh,
Baraka is
wonderful.
hosting it, and they're dealing with Africa and African American, Pan Africa. The president of Ghana was here in September, and he was here to proclaim to the world that Ghana is inaugurating a celebration that has its root 400 years ago when Africans were dumped into Jamestown, Virginia in 1619. So 2019
okay.
is the 400th
Wow.
anniversary of one of those important
Wow.
historical moments. And
that's
he has said that Ghana is opening itself up for the return of Africans by any means necessary. Visits, pilgrimage, businesses,
Sankofa.
school,
Time to go down.
education. And so
Sankofa.
I'm saying that you're initiating this year in your way. I'm saying a year is important as a start, but we need to declare this year a decade, the beginning of a decade of African consciousness.
And with that, the God in me loves the God in you, and return back here next week to the Gilchrist Experience. Power to the people, and God loves us all. And seek your spiritual journey and your spiritual peace. God bless you. Amen.
Why are you holding
Power
up a
to the
black
people.
power fist? That ain't just,
Well, that's the power to the people.
okay. Power to black
Power
people.
to the power to people.
Power to people.
Power to good people.
Especially black people, because they deserve it.
Well, we're the energy of everything. You know, why can't we be loving to all the nonsense that goes on, even Donald Trump?
No,
Because he's a fool.
We have to love them.
We have to
but we
teach.
got to keep our eyes open on
all
them.
the
And we
time.
have to
I don't
read
hate
their
anybody,
hearts
all
and their
right?
minds.
Hate does
and
nothing
see
but
them.
poison the system.
Oh,
You gotta love. Amen. Power to the people.
he sounds like Cory Booker.
Power to
Love,
love.
got to love. You
That's
can't go through the
love.
world with no love.
That's-
you need to love yourself. That's the
I
first
do.
I do.
basic
That's the
of love
first
is
one
to
I
love
talk
yourself
to.
and yours.
You ain't gonna get me to hate anybody. All right? I'm staying here in America, finding my spiritual root.
Everybody
Power to the
needs
people.
love.
So that's part one. So what you gonna do for part two?
Everybody
Well,
needs
part two
love.
is I'll lay it on you.
You're
All
off
right.
the air.
Actually,